Hello and welcome to the second talk in a series of talks on the documents of the Second Vatican Council, given for the Year of Faith. This talk is given by Professor Bart McGettrick on the declaration of the relation of the Church to the non-Christian religions, and on the decree on the Catholic Churches of the Eastern Rite, held at St Wilfrid's Parish Centre, Preston, on the 15th of November 2012. This series is facilitated by the Metanoia project. Professor Bart is Dean of Education at Liverpool Hope University and is a Regent of Bethlehem University.
It is a pleasure to be here. I must say it's the first time I have spoken in Preston, just so that you're aware of it, that I still live in Glasgow and travel to Liverpool every week through Preston and change trains at Wigan North Western. If ever I get on to Mastermind, my specialist topic is going to be Wigan North Western Railway Station. My God, what a place that is. It just fills you with all kinds of thoughts. The great advantage, of course, in Wigan North Western, and I hope I'm not going to offend too many of you here, is that you can get a complete nasal makeover if you smell the factory of Uncle Joe's mint balls. That's the one advantage of coming through Wigan. But it is a pleasure to be here this evening. What I will try to do is to simply give you some thoughts and reflections from the two documents, the document on the Oriental rites and the document on interfaith dialogue. I'll do that simply by talking through what these documents meant to me, but I'll do this in three parts. I'll refer to some of what I think are the general principles that come from these documents. Secondly, to say something then about, particularly thinking of the Eastern rites, a few reflections on contemporary issues in the Holy Land as they affect the Christian communities there. And I hope not to be too political, but I also hope that I won't miss the mark. And thirdly, say something about the work that goes on at Bethlehem University, which is a Christian university in a Muslim society, and sort of rather reflect some of the issues that arose from the Vatican Council document. So I'll speak in these three parts. I should say, becoming increasingly confident about what I say as I move from one to the other. And I hope there'll be opportunity for questions, and I hope there'll be an opportunity for someone else to answer the questions, because you can be pretty sure I won't be able to do it. So the two documents I've been asked to speak about, one about the Eastern rites and the other about interfaith dialogue, are of course, like all the documents of the Second Vatican Council, very important documents. And it does seem to me that as one reads these documents and rereads them, that they focus on what it is to be concerned with religion. And indeed, one of these documents, the document on Nostra AETATE, the interfaith, gives a very interesting statement. There's a very interesting statement there about what is the purpose of any religion. And it talks about the fact that a religion is to bring peace to the restlessness of the human heart. And that struck me as a very interesting statement. If I suppose, had ever reflected on what the purpose of a religion was, it was maybe more precisely to do with a relationship with God and one's fellow human beings. But that idea that a religion is bringing peace to the restlessness of the human heart, I think is something that is worth reflecting on. It's worth praying about. It's worth suggesting that that is a very important part of what it is to have any religion, and particularly Christianity. And I suppose the way in which one tries to interpret that is to be very respectful of world religions generally, that they all try to give a peace to the restlessness of the human heart. And it also talks about the importance of safeguarding an ordered way of life. So not only does it give peace, it gives order to one's life. It gives you a scaffolding, a structure, a set of principles, ideas, thoughts, concepts that are giving some degree of order to one's life. And that's not just a matter of looking at 10 Commandments or something of that kind, but the whole way in which liturgy and sacrament and so on is established gives an order to life. So these are two of the main concepts that I took from the document on interfaith dialogue, that one should be respectful of all religions, and these are two of the principles that underlie the idea of religion. And the documents themselves, of course, also rather emphasize the fact that one might seek to find simple ways of dealing with complex issues, but actually many of the issues are themselves complex, so that when one looks at some of the contemporary challenges in the Catholic Church, such as vocations to the priesthood and so on, these are not always susceptible to simple answers. They are complex issues, and one should address them with the kind of complexity that they do. Also central to that kind of discussion are, of course, the issues surrounding interfaith dialogue, the complexities that there are within that. And I suppose this evening that's one of the things we should reflect on, the question of what are the complexities of issues in interfaith dialogue, because what we're not seeking is some kind of quick fix on ecumenism and dialogue that is just looking for the common elements of religions. It's an important dialogue in which we are certainly dealing with work still in progress. It seems to me that Second Vatican Council, as one rereads the documents, did have some very far-sighted views of Christianity and of the Catholic Church, and that the documents illustrate that in many ways. And we shouldn't be weary about reading these documents or weary of the reflections on them, but rather go steadily to think about how can we, in our own small ways often, try to make sure that these documents are part of what the Council Fathers were trying to say about Catholicism and the Catholic Church. I'll give my views on these. I should say that these views are simply reflections devoid of scholarship. I have no background in theology. I have no background in reflecting on what happened at the Second Vatican Council, I suppose, other than the document on education, but someone else has got the privilege of doing that. But I was involved in the rewrite, interestingly, of the Second Vatican Council document on education 25 years after the first document was produced. And that was a very interesting exercise, because many of the people who had written the first document were there to reflect 25 years later on what they had written and how they were going to rewrite parts of it because of the way in which it had been put together. However, this evening we're looking at other faiths, and I suppose what one should reflect on with other faiths is that we are encouraged to be gracious and open to other faiths, respecting the truth that some other faiths have, the importance of their sense of truth, and that we also recognize that sometimes truth is an idea that can encompass more than one denomination. You know, one of the things I'm involved professionally in the world of education. One of the aspects of life in a university, various aspects of life in a university one can talk about. But it seems to me that one of the things that one could say about a university is that in a university you should always speak truth. My view of a university, in fact, is to say that a university is a place that should be open to all ideas. Every idea should be possible to express in a university, so long as the idea is subjected to the cleansing light of truth. And the question, of course, then is, what is truth? But that notion that we're in pursuit of truth, and when dealing with other religions, we are also in pursuit of truth. And one of the things I suppose I also reflect on in education is that the truth of the other and of the self can be different. And that opens the idea of dialogue. What is the other truth, and how do we engage in dialogue so that one is respectful of other people? One is always respectful of difference and being at peace with difference. And looking at other world religions, it is important, I think, to say that there are indeed many rooms in my Father's house, and that one should be able to express dialogue and the importance of dialogue in the way in which we deal with other world religions. One of the things that I believe to be important is that, however, we always hang on to our own truth. What is the truth of the Christian traditions and the Catholic traditions? We ought to know that, and we ought to be able to express them. One of the sayings that there is in a document outside my room in Liverpool Hope University is a quote from Benjamin Franklin, which is to say, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserves neither liberty or safety." Don't give up the essential truth just because it happens to be convenient. And I think in a world of ecumenical dialogue, in a world of interfaith dialogue, Christians should never give up the pursuit of truth for some temporary agreements and arrangements that happen to be convenient. It's the pursuit of truth that's at the heart of this. And I think the Second Vatican Council documents are telling us to do that. Be faithful to the truth that, as we know it, and don't easily slide away just because it happens to suit some kind of short-term contemporary view of ecumenism or interfaith dialogue. That's not what we're about. We're about the importance of the authentic truth as it has been given to us. So the documents themselves are very clear about that, the importance of that truth. And the documents, of course, are not the end point of some sort of debate, but rather often in many ways are the springboards for future thought and future discussion, so that 50 years on we are still reflecting on them and considering them and acting on them to look at how we can serve God through their application. I think in all of these documents one sees Jesus Christ at the heart of what it is that we're being told, alive within us and within our communities. And yet worth remembering that there are other communities and other places where there are people who are working authentically and with great sense of their own faith that may also be trying to satisfy this restlessness of the human heart. So some of the guiding principles of the Second Vatican Council documents in general run through these documents on interfaith dialogue and on the Eastern rites. We are certainly encouraged to follow two of them. The two of them being looking at social justice, the importance of justice in our world, and the importance of moral welfare. And these are, I think, driving the causes of human development that come through these documents. We have a mission through our baptism to leave the world a better place than we entered it. And we try to do that by trying to instill in the world a world of justice. And it may be just something to reflect on when I sat various places around Bethlehem and the Holy Land. One of the things that is very striking to me, again, and I hope you'll forgive me for raising this really through the world of education, but we can teach people to live in a world of justice. And we can teach people about justice. But we can't teach them about peace. What we can do is, I think, teach them to live in a world of justice. And without justice, you'll never be at peace. And one of the things that is striking to me is that peace is a God-given gift. It's not something you easily educate for. It comes as a gift from God. And when I was reading these documents, I was thinking of some of the times that I've sat in Bethlehem and looked at students learning and going through that desperate rote learning that is characteristic of Muslim communities because of the impact of the Quran on their mentality, and they learn everything off by heart. And you even see them going round the quadrangles and places in the university, learning lecturers' notes off by heart. And I often think, God, imagine if that was happening in Liverpool. Learning by heart some of the junk that people talk there, dear God. I mean, that is a very depressing thought indeed. But I dare say it's not that different in Bethlehem. They probably learn a lot of junk there too. But that idea that the idea of learning is often a rote learning, not kind of critical thinking of the kind that you tend to get in Western societies. And of course that is also an interesting reflection on the Eastern churches, that the Eastern churches will themselves be places where often rote learning is at the heart of what they do, learning prayers off by heart, rather than the kind of what we're perhaps more used to, and if I may say, listening to the beautiful prayers constructed, I'm going to say on the hoof. I'm sure there's a more elegant way of putting that, but you know what I mean. Someone with a guitar in hand and praying with us. And that's become very much part of us. You would never get that in an Eastern church, because it's very much more controlled. But that's just one little example. So the idea of religion in the East and in other faiths contributing to the ordered freedom of our days, I think that idea that religion brings order to life is very important, and I would say myself that what they are talking about is ordered freedom. It's trying to free people by helping the restless heart, giving people liberty, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in life, but it's freeing, it's always liberating, never clamping people down. And I suppose that is a characteristic of the Second Vatican Council, that it was moving at a time when, prior to the Second Vatican Council, when Latin was used for the Mass and so on, it was trying to liberate people, but to do it with a sense of order, providing security in a world of uncertainty and confusion, providing graciousness in a world of aggression and sometimes even the abuse of authority, and providing freedom in a world dominated by accountability and oppression, giving a kind of gentle, or giving gently and graciously our understanding of what it is to speak the truth and to be kindly to others who thirst also for the truth as they look to make a relationship with God. And I suppose that idea in the Second Vatican Council document on interfaith dialogue is constantly saying to us, know that people seek God in an authentic kind of way, and the religion is often a product of their culture, not just of doctrine. And that's one of the things I suppose over the years I've learned as I move from one place to another again in the field of education, that sometimes it does seem to me that we too quickly look at interfaith dialogue without looking at intercultural dialogue, looking at cultures. How do cultures express themselves? And one of the very interesting comments made in Nostra Aetate, that's the interfaith, looking at non-Christian faiths, it talks about Christians being aware of how they might look at religions that are not yet come to fruition. That there are new religions that can emerge, and we should not be too impatient with them. And it frankly hadn't occurred to me that there are new religions that emerge over time in different times and different places. And I suppose if you're writing a Second Vatican or a Vatican Council document and you've got that long view, you might think, yeah, maybe in 200 or 300 years there are new religions that emerge and come to help people, and we shouldn't be slow to condemn them. We should be quick to enter into discussion about why these happen and so on. So that kind of cultural background to religion did strike me as being quite interesting and quite important. So the essential messages of these documents are, I think, about the flourishing is helping humanity to flourish, but not in a narrow way, saying that the only way to salvation is through the Latin Catholic, Roman Catholic way of thinking. There are other ways of looking to develop a relationship with God and with other people. And I suppose, particularly the document on the Eastern rites, when I read that and I thought, what in the name of heaven am I going to say to you tonight? Because that document spends quite a lot of time on issues about one Eastern rite over another. And of course there are many, many Eastern churches. You know, you only have to spend any time in Jerusalem or the Palestine or Israel to know that you're dealing with groups such as the Malachites and the Maronites and the Greek Catholics and the Russian Greeks. And even when you get to the Maronites, there are urban Maronites and rural Maronites. There are subdivisions of that. And you think, dear me. And you try to go to the services of any of these Christian groups, and you've got to be careful because sometimes the Sunday Mass can take 6 hours if you get into the wrong church. And although one of the interesting things about that is they seem to me to often go out and do their shopping in the middle of it. So, which is maybe something I should say, if you excuse me saying this, Father, maybe something we should be thinking about in with some of the sermons that one hears. I'm sure not in Preston, but in other places you'd be as well going out for your shopping, frankly. But that idea that you have a relationship and that there is a liturgy that is really quite different from the Roman liturgy, if I can refer to, or the Latin liturgy, if I can refer to the Mass that we would normally attend in those terms. So those ideas of liturgy are important. And in the document on the Oriental churches, there is quite a lot of detail about the liturgies, about the sacraments, about the equivalence of sacraments, about the equivalence of priesthood and so on. And of course these are all very interesting. I'm always struck when I'm in Jerusalem and go to the Maronite rite, which is one of these Eastern rites, that the priests are often married and have children and families and so on, and yet it's in full communion with Rome, and that's always a source of some interest. And it's not just that that's not a comment on married priesthood. I don't know that it's a necessary consequence of it, but there are some of these rites where those sorts of things happen, and yet we are all part of this one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. And so it's sometimes worth reflecting on some of these rites and what they do. The Vatican Council document is really quite specific about a lot of these details, and it did strike me how different the two documents are when I read them, in that the Oriental Church, the relationship with the Oriental Church is often about these sacramental issues and the authority and so on, whereas the document on interfaith dialogue of non-Christian faith is much more philosophical in talking about the restless heart and the importance of being open to people and so on. And so, for me, they're quite contrasting documents. One of the things, of course, you'll be aware of is that in the Holy Land now, when dealing with the Eastern churches, in the Holy Land is very small. The numbers are less than 2%. And talking to people like the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Patriarch Twal says he used to look at statistics among the Christian communities of his diocese. Now he doesn't look at the statistics, he looks at what families are remaining. He could name people who are still there rather than just look at the statistics, and that's the difference in his life, how he sees these. So you're talking about a Christian community now in the Patriarchate area, which is Palestine, Israel, Cyprus, Jordan, and you're looking at less than 2% of the population and probably nearer 1% because it's declining very rapidly. The document on interfaith dialogue, however, does talk to us about the importance of being respectful of these different religions and of understanding that there is sometimes quite a lot of overlap between the way in which Christians pray and sometimes the way in which our Muslim brothers and sisters pray. I remember on one occasion, again referring to time in the Holy Land, being in Jericho and sitting under a tree and listening to the person shout from minarets for time of prayer, and I was with somebody and said, what's he saying when he calls people to prayer? And he did the translation for me. 90% of it you could have said in a Catholic church. Bits of it you wouldn't have done, but 90% of it was the same, asking people to turn to God, to pray to God, to have a relationship with God. And I think sometimes we forget that, and the Vatican Council documents remind us, that people do turn to God and do that with great sincerity and great honesty, and we should be respectful of that, rather than to think of our Muslim friends as the enemy. That kind of demonization of Muslims, where you get terrorism and all of that kind of thing built into the model of thinking about what is Islam and so on. It did strike me it would be really interesting to sit down 50 years later, sit down now and say what would have been written by the Council Fathers if they were now writing about that dialogue, because in the paper they do talk about the quarrels and hostilities that there have been between the Christians and Muslim communities of the past, and the need to seek social justice and welfare for all God's people, and that the importance of relationships across different faith groups and across different religions. And commenting on that reinforces the idea, again to quote a little bit from the document, it's foreign to the mind of Christ to have any discrimination or harassment because of race, colour, condition of life, or religion. It's foreign to the mind of Christ to have any kind of discrimination. And I think that is, of course, a very important Christian principle, that one cannot see discrimination as being a part of our Christian heritage. Let me now just turn then from the documents themselves to say a few words about the current situation in the Holy Land, and I'll try not to get too political about it, because even today one sees the strikes in Gaza by Israel. And I hope I will be very clear in not making the easily made relationship between Israeli and Jew, because many of the difficulties that we have are because of the Israeli, that is the political Israel, not because of a religion. And I don't want to fall into that trap, and I don't want to have you interpret what I say being about the Jewish people rather than about Israel. And so, commenting on some of this, and I think it might be useful to do it, and these comments are made partly, might be a source of amazement to you, that I was actually thinking about this talk about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, not just 20 minutes. Although you could have been struggling here, I tell you, with the one-way system in Preston. My God, I'd have been well finished by this time if I had waited to make these notes this evening. But these comments come largely from discussions with the Patriarch about 2.5 weeks ago when I was with him in Rome. And as he referred to it, he spoke about the Arab Spring that has emerged, or that's how the papers portray the Arab Spring in the Muslim countries. And he said, it is anything but an Arab Spring. It is a sizzling summer where the heat is turned up higher and higher, and life is getting more and more difficult day by day. The Christian communities are uncertain about their position and about their future, and you should be under no illusions that their future is unclear and is ambivalent. The words of the Second Vatican Council document are prophetic and profound, but life in the Holy Land and in the Middle East lacks any humanity and is not the kind of life that is inspired by what was in the minds of the Council Fathers. He spoke about the debacle of the Arab world in Libya, Yemen, Iran, and Bahrain, and that is now a nightmare. There is no certainty about the future, and events that are now taking place in Syria are not just about an isolated, despotic regime. It's even led Saudi Arabia to present itself as being the defender of human rights. It's that bad. So we should be very much aware of the hostilities in that part of the world. We should also be aware that very little of that is reflected in the press of this country or in the Western world generally. There is almost no reference to the tearing up of the New Testament in the Knesset about 5-6 weeks ago, and of the hostility there can be in the Israeli government towards Christians and Christian thinking. And that's something I think, I just want to share with you as a thought. And I'm not wanting to say that politically. I'm wanting just to share it as, one talks about interfaith dialogue and being respectful, and one should be immensely respectful of Jewish friends or Muslim friends and so on. But one should also recognize that it's not just the prayer life and the religious life, but there's a political dimension to this that is deeply worrying. It's deeply worrying because the number of Christians now in the Holy Land is declining to such a level that if it goes on the way it's going, soon there will be no Christians in the Holy Land. I shouldn't say soon, but the trend is in that direction. Can we have any hope? Can we have any hope for this? Oh, it's not easy to see rays of hope. Although one could say that in South Africa and in Germany and to some extent in Northern Ireland, change came very quickly. And they came from some unexpected quarters. And maybe the only hope one can have is that something will happen in the Middle East and the Holy Land that will change the way in which things are being done. Because I don't know how many of you will have been to areas like Bethlehem, but around Bethlehem there's a wall. Now, if that wall was extended out the way and started in Preston, just to give you an idea of the scale of it, it would finish around Lille in France. That's the length of it. And there are only 2 gates through it. You think, how can any group of people believe that that is going to lead to a world of peace and of human growth and human development? It's a scourge on humanity to see that sort of thing being built. And these walls are not just, the height of the ceiling here. Sometimes they're up 60, 80 feet, and they are barbed wire and electric wire on the top of them and all sorts of stuff, and they cut through communities. These are horrendous examples of what's happening in the Holy Land, and we shouldn't be slow to talk about those and to recognize them and to say, I believe we should say, this is wrong. No one, I'm sure, can accept that it's a right thing to do to build walls like that. And pretty well daily, there are attacks on communities, Christian communities, Muslim communities, by the Israelis. And I think that we need to find ways of looking at justice. Actually, my view of all of this as I reflect on it and I talk to people in Bethlehem University, I think part of the difficulty is that when one talks about justice in the Holy Land, there are different concepts of justice. We may well have a concept of justice in our country, but is that one that is shared by, say, the Jewish people? The Old Testament, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. There's still quite a lot of that style of justice that goes on. So that if you do send a rocket from Gaza into Israel, the only just thing you can do is to send 10 back. That is what justice is. And of course, for the Christians, that's a horrendous view of justice. And this is where you have to say, didn't Jesus come to fulfill the law and add to it, not to get rid of it, but to add to it, and to talk of a world of forgiveness and love and of care and of compassion. And I suppose that's where one wants to say, as Christians, we should be people who pray for and seek and help everyone to be people who would look towards greater humanitarian developments. But you have to recognize that there are some religious groups that don't see the world in that kind of way. And I think that is part of the difficulty that there is in the Holy Land. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of it. Just another one or two issues to mention here, and I won't go into the detail of it, but one of the things that may be of some interest to some of you is that in the Oriental churches and the Latin church, Easter is often at a time. So if you have plans to go to Easter Sunday in Jerusalem, so that you're part of the Easter services and so on, I tell you, it's a bit bloomin' depressing when you go and you find they're just starting Holy Week. And you have another Holy Week that you might want to follow, and you thought you were going to have Easter eggs, things like that. And that's very common to find that there's a week's difference between the Latin churches and the Eastern churches. And pretty well they follow the Julian calendar, the Eastern churches, most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. This coming year, 2013, they are getting their act together. And you have to say what an amazing step forward that will be. We'll at least know when Easter is. Although that is not going to be the case in Jerusalem or Bethlehem, because actually it suits them to make sure that the holy places aren't deluged by the same people at the same time. So they're keeping it different so that it actually mucks up the whole thing. So those ideas of getting a one date for Easter and all that kind of thing, the Patriarchate in Jerusalem is working with the Latin Rite to get that regularized. And by 2015, they have agreed that they will have that regularized. So if you're interested in looking at going to Jerusalem or Bethlehem and these areas, you might find by 2015, when you think you're going in Holy Week, it is in fact Holy Week. If you go at the present time, it's all very confusing. And that's because of the different calendars that are used. Let me just finish off by making one or two comments then about Bethlehem University, which is where I spend most of my time when I'm in the Holy Land. And one of the things I try to do there is to help them, the policies on education and how they're developing the university. The university is quite a small university by our standards. It's a university with about 3,000 students. It's a Christian university run by the De La Salle brothers. These are they're not the Irish Christian brothers, but they're referred to as Christian brothers, but they're not the Irish Christian brothers. That's Edmund Rice's group. This is Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. So the Christian brothers run it, mainly the American provinces of the Christian brothers that run the university. It is a Christian university in a Muslim society. One of the questions that's sometimes asked is, what is the role of a Christian university in a Muslim society? What does it do for the Christian students? For the Muslim students? Because about 60% of the students are Muslim. The answer to that is the role of a Christian university in relation to a Muslim student is to make them better Muslims. It is to recognize that we have a role to see everyone flourish to the best of their ability. It is not to try to convert them. It's not a question of conversion. It's a question of helping people to flourish and develop in whatever way they can, and to do that with the values that we would value. Values of love and care and compassion, a sense of service, a sense of hope, and an appreciation of beauty. Those are the sorts of values that would inspire the activities in Bethlehem University. And the university tries to create people of justice and of hope. It tries to create people that will serve the Palestinian government and the country when it emerges as an independent state. It tries to do what it can to ensure particularly that it produces enough teachers for the schools, the patriarchate schools of Palestine and Jordan and Israel. It tries to produce nurses who will serve in the clinics and in the hospitals of Palestine, and there to give a sense of service to the Palestinian people, and to give that sense of service imbued by Christian principles rather than just by the kind of secular principles that dominates in so many other Palestinian universities. So it's a place of, my own view is it's a kind of oasis of Christian thinking in Palestine. It does have a very significant theology department where they work on the history and of sacred texts and so on, and it relates to the seminary, which of course produces priests for the patriarch and indeed beyond. So it's a significant part of the work of the church, and indeed it is an arm of the church. It's a part of the Christian mission in the Holy Land, and I think a very important one, and has now become quite a significant centre for the dialogue with the Oriental churches and indeed with other faiths in that part of the world. They struggle, I think, to develop Christian-Jewish dialogue, although that's beginning and hopefully will flourish. They've certainly gone quite a long way to establish dialogue with the Muslim society, largely because the Muslim society is such a dominant part of Palestine. So Bethlehem University, I think, is an important part. It's a kind of totem pole of development in that part of the world. And of course, successive popes have gone there and have supported the work that has gone on in Bethlehem. But that's perhaps I should finish at that point and say that if there are any comments or thoughts or questions, I'd be grateful if you could make them easy. Thank you.
What you were saying about the Israeli government and anti-Christian sentiments, what do you think of the relationship between Israel and America, given that America has a very strong Christian presence?
Very strong right-wing Christian presence. I think one of the interesting issues to keep an eye on is what Obama will do in the next 2 or 3 months. I was part of a group, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I was part of a group that went to Palestine in February last, and we were looking at the question of how the Christian communities were faring in Palestine, to which the answer was not very well. And we had the opportunity of speaking to some of the consuls, Israel, the consul from the United States, from Canada, from Britain, France, Italy, and the European Union. Didn't realize the European Union had a consul, but they do. We were asking the question, are the countries, those countries represented, doing about building of the wall, about civil injustice, and about human rights in Palestine? The American consul general said, this is in February, we are waiting for an election in November. I am not permitted to make any comment about what the American government will do. Question then is, would you do anything? Or is the Americans committed to doing nothing? Answer, Americans are committed to doing nothing until November, which allowed the Israelis to build more and more of take over more and more of the land without anyone saying anything hostile about it. What do I think will happen? It'll be very interesting to see what Obama does in the next few months. If he doesn't start some sort of attempt to develop peace in the Middle East, I would be fearful for the future of the Christians.
So in terms of, is the anti-Christian sentiment quite a recent thing then in relation to Obama's?
I don't think it's historic actually. I think it is quite recent, and I think it's to do with some of the personalities in the Israeli government, rather than deep-rooted in than any religion. Yeah, I think it's Netanyahu and people like that, rascals.
The book Christian Phobia, which actually documents the world order, the prejudice that we often untalked about prejudice against Christians all over the world.
Yeah.
Because those things like the score elements of violence, things that themselves to say, don't do the score elements very more. Christians, thankfully nowadays, are very non-violent, so often more distorted. Like there is a book documenting that, not simply in Israel, but the whole world order.
Yeah. I suppose that's what you see in Nigeria, like that, in northern Nigeria at the present time too. But on the other hand, when you read the Second Vatican Council documents on interfaith dialogue, it's a very open view of how we should be open to the ideas of other people being different from us. Be open. I struggle a bit with the idea of, should one do what I think I've always been brought up to think about from days of being educated by the Jesuits. I say being educated by the Jesuits, I mean, I have to be careful, because sometimes I think, the Jesuits have a tremendous, and I've got a colleague here who was also educated by them. He was educated, I was just at school. But the Jesuits have a reputation for doing great work in education. But in my view, it's not for teaching what Christ taught. It's for teaching what Christ would have taught if he had been at a Jesuit school. So you've got to be kind of careful about what happens. But does one try to seek God in everything? Or should we just be open to let God seek us? Should we be open to let God come to us sometimes? And I think when I was reading the Nostra AETATE, that came through to me on several occasions. Just be open to let God into your life. Don't be driven.
I was also educated by the Jesuits, so I'm quite grateful for that. I think that there seems to be a tension, it would seem to me, with the approach to the Council doctrines, the openness and accepting people as they are, which I think is absolutely a gospel way of looking at things. But the tension seems to be as well between that and evangelization, which is part of our mission.
Yeah.
And another Professor Charles Taylor, in his book which you may have read called Secular Age, he speaks about the church at the time of the council maybe making friends with the contemporary world.
Yeah.
But the contemporary world was also in crisis as well, about its own understanding of itself, the culture of death, and all that we know that goes on. And that there is a tension between being the church in the world, which is the church of evangelization, whilst also being open to all the other people, all the other places that we live amongst.
Sure.
That you just comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you call that a tension. It can do. Yeah, right. Well, I tell you, I still live in Glasgow. Talk about tension. I still live in Glasgow, and I'm therefore a product of west of Scotland Catholicism. It's got all the mental health issues you want to raise in that phrase, but what I have been struck by when I went to Liverpool Hope University. Liverpool Hope University is the only Christian ecumenical university in the world. The only Christian ecumenical university in the world. And of course, it was formed by coming together of Catholic and Anglican colleges of education, essentially. But it tries to live out a kind of spirit of ecumenism. When I was in Glasgow, and forgive my simplicity in this, when I was in Glasgow, I thought ecumenism was to do with understanding of what we share in common and how we might work together when we share ideas in common and so on, and seeking common ways of praying and working together and being together and making a better world. Now that I'm in Liverpool, I don't think that at all. What I find in Liverpool Hope University is I can live my life as a Catholic. And I have colleagues who live their lives as Anglicans and Methodists and Baptists and so on. And I respect their difference. And I also create in my work, I'm responsible for a faculty of education, I create in that faculty space where we can talk about our differences if we want to. And the ecumenism for me is about the respect for the other and the space to talk about it and discuss it and be together in community with one another. Not in communion, but in community with one another. And that's what I feel the ecumenical university is about. So that idea of, is there a tension there? That's what I struggle with. When I'm in my work, day in, day out, I actually don't feel that to be a tension for me at the moment. But maybe that's because I'm not trying to push anything. I'm not trying to evangelize, if you like. Or the evangelization is rather in the space that's created, and you hope for the Lord's work in that space. So, concepts of tension is just, it to me is a very interesting way of putting it. I think if I was in Glasgow and tried to do that, you would have tension. But I don't feel it in where I am. And now maybe that's because there's a structure of the university, there's an acceptance that people want to be there and so on. But it does seem to me to be right that Christians are together in that kind of way. And it's been I found it a great blessing. Of course, I do have to say that I don't understand a word they say, because they're all talking Scouse, and my God. And they don't understand a word I say, which is fine. So we got on very well with it.
There's a great potential in society as a whole, not specifically Christian environment,
Yeah.
In the secular world as a whole, there are environments where almost anything seems to go.
Yeah.
And when you're in that kind of community, that's the form of tension, to which maybe a laid-back approach might not be the right response.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I actually think there's a huge tension in society between a secular world and a non-secular world, and the idea of talking about spirituality in the modern world, to some people seems very odd. They think it's a form of fantasy. Whereas, for me, when I talk about people being educated in the modern world, I say, walk with 2 feet. One in the world of the here and now, the secular world, hard pavements and tough world accountability. But the other foot in the world of the spirit and beyond, in the mystical world. And if you don't walk with 2 steady feet, you'll develop a limp. And I think that's important, not to see the world just in the here and now and the secular and the measured outcomes and the accountability and all that hard-edged way of thinking, but live in a world where the Spirit is with us too. And that'll keep you balanced. They're all from the Bethlehem area. They're largely from they're of the 3,000 students or thereabouts, about 2,850 or something like that will be from Bethlehem, from inside Bethlehem itself, each day, and that is horrendous for them. Well, it's quite interesting actually. One of the things that when you speak to the students who come through the wall day by day and they live in Jerusalem or Hebron or something like that, when you say to them, what is the worst thing about that? What is it about going through the wall? They say, actually, it's not at the wall itself. It's about 5 minutes before you get to the wall. And you don't know if you're going to get through the wall. You might be stopped, or you might be moved right through, or you might be stopped and your documents taken from you and you're standing there for half an hour. You're late for class, you might have your books taken off you. There's plenty examples of these young soldiers asking girls in particular to strip and that kind of thing. You don't know what's going to happen. So 5 minutes before you get to the wall, they get knots in their stomach and they think, what's going to happen today? Now that's the torture they go through. So there are about 150 to 200 students maybe who travel through, but it's a very difficult. Yeah. They're mainly in Peru, in the areas around Toronto, big Canadian group of people. But interestingly, Peru and South America generally are yeah. Oh, horrendous. Yeah. Should pray for them, Well, you know, and you think, you know, should they stay? Should they be part of the Christian presence in the Holy Land? Well, that's all very well, but you've got a family of 2 or 3, 4 children. What are you going to do? Are you going to just stay there and be victims and feel victims? Or are you going to move out of it and say, no, I want a better life than this. I can do better if I go elsewhere. It's a tough call. Mm. Yeah, very much so. No, all Christians come together. I had the most peculiar experience one Sunday. I had gone to Jerusalem, and I was living in a convent with priests, and I had got to Jerusalem at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And because I had been travelling, I hadn't been to Mass. So I said to the priests, is there an evening Mass on Sunday in Jerusalem? To which the answer is no, there isn't. So if you ever end up in Jerusalem on a Sunday afternoon, you've had it. So he said to me, no, there isn't, but there's a service in the Church of Scotland. Now, for me, I thought, what? Church of Scotland? Why would I go to a Church of Scotland? You're kind of, you know, I'm from Glasgow. The idea of going into a Church of Scotland in Glasgow, my God, you'd need dark glasses and a wig or something. And I said, but, you know, are you kidding? And he said, what do you mean, am I kidding? He said he would think that was satisfying a Sunday obligation, to go to another Christian service. So the Christians actually work very closely together. We want to see Christians working closely together in the Church of Scotland, Lutheran Church, Anglican Church, Catholic Church. Go to Jerusalem. They work very closely together. And they attend one another's services. My advice, if you ever is Syrian Catholic, be careful, the 6-hour Mass. The rest are usually okay, but God, the 6-hour Mass, till your knees are. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you work alongside other academic institutions in the area? From
in Bethlehem.
Yes. In the area.
Yes, they are. They are one of 15 Palestinian universities, and probably it's the most prestigious of them. But they do work alongside the other Palestinian universities. They don't work at all with the Israeli universities, but none of the Palestinian universities do. That takes you into that political environment. It's not a religious question, it's a political question. But the Palestinian universities have decided to have no relationships with the Israeli universities. And there are some great Israeli universities, University of Haifa, the Technikon in Tel Aviv, and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. These are very, very good universities. The Palestinian universities wouldn't have anything to do with them because of the politics. But they work together with the 15 universities. I was in Palestine in July, was to give a talk to the principals and senior staff of the Palestinian universities, all 15 of them. I did that in Hebron. But it was because of my link with Bethlehem. So they do work across other Palestinian universities. And Bethlehem University also does a lot of work internationally. For example, they work with Liverpool Hope in education. English. And they teach, in Bethlehem, they teach in English. Although the native language of the students will be Arabic. All the teaching is done in English. When you get to Bethlehem, there are these checkpoints now. And when I first started to go to these, to go to Bethlehem, the checkpoints were big rocks in the road. that you just had to drive round, and that's what stopped you. Now they are built into, the road goes in, they've got these metal spikes that you have to go over. When the car stops, you've got the gun trained on you. The Israeli soldiers are in turrets with the guns on you. It's much more intimidating. It's not just an awkward thing, it's absolutely built into the fabric of the country. That said, I should say to you, if you have any thought of going to the Holy Land, go. You won't be at risk. It'll be a nuisance, but you won't find yourself personally at risk. And it's well worth going to just to see where Jesus walked and died and so on. These are very, very interesting places to visit. And I remember, maybe I'll finish off with this very dubious thought. I remember walking in the streets of Jerusalem. It was one of the most meaningful conversations I had, and I was with a priest. And we were walking down past the Greek patriarchate place. And he said to me, and I should say the streets of Jerusalem are about, they won't be the width of this room, but from the wall to about here, and you're big, also walking down steps. He said to me, isn't it curious that Jesus walked in these streets? Can you believe that he was really God? Can you believe that God walked in these streets? He said, don't we make it terribly difficult for our Muslim friends to believe that prophet actually was God? And that's the mystery of the Christian tradition. He was God who walked in those streets. And I think, for me, that was one of the moments in life where you think, how can God have been walking in these streets? But that's what we believe, and that's where he walked, and that's where he died, and he died for us.
If you enjoyed this talk and want to hear the rest of the series, they will be available at www.metanoiaproject.co.uk.